Looks like we have a handful of people joining. We'll get started in just a moment. Chloe's joining now. How are you doing, Chloe?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Doing very well.
Excellent. It's only Thursday and Halloween's around the corner.
I'm excited too. My daughter's birthday is on Halloween, and so we're gonna have a big party and lots of like one of those mystery dinner games, whatever you call them. I can't remember.
Mystery dinner.
Oh, it's a murder mystery dinner.
Oh, I love those. Yeah. Those are so much fun.
Yeah, should be really good. I already created your poll for you, so if you want to take a look at it.
Sure.
Kept it just as we talked about. So if you're joining us, go ahead and answer the question in the poll for the session. Just click on the poll tab and then toggle over from the event to the session that you're in, and hopefully we'll get some votes here. Yeah. So far, people like my paranoid option.
I still think that one is brilliant.
Thanks. Oh, there's a knock on the door. I've got to go. We'll start here in just a moment, probably about 2 more minutes.
How's the conference going so far?
It's been amazing. You know, we haven't used this platform before, and we shopped around quite a bit, and it's been really nice. It's lots of ways to meet people. If you look over on the left, there's meet other attendees, and there's a way you can just sort of randomly meet someone.
Nice.
And I did it, and it was a fellow SaltConf employee that I hadn't talked to in a while, so that was kind of fun.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, I've only used this, I think, for one of the conferences. It was like WeAreHackerz, I think it was. They had something like this. I was like, oh, this is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I like how interactive the whole thing is. The only feedback that I've gotten that would be kind of cool is to kind of maybe toggle around from session to session without leaving one. But if you click on the little calendar icon at the top, you can see what other sessions are going on at the same time. So it's kind of nice. But you guys want to be in this session. You don't want to leave this one. These are not the droids.
This is the fun one.
That's right. Chloe knows what's up, so this is it.
I will keep you on your toes.
Awesome. We're going to start in about 30 seconds. So we still have a few people joining, but maybe I'll note it in the chat too. We've already got quite a few votes in the poll, but I would say pop over to the poll and answer the question so Chloe knows where most of you are at as far as whether you're a hacker or not.
If you're a hacker, please press 1. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. If you're not, press 2. To repeat this menu.
Are you sure you are not a hacker? It's okay to state you are a hacker.
Are you sure you want to leave? Nice. All right, I'll go ahead and start. We're going to kick this off. I'm going to introduce Chloe, and just so you know, while she's presenting, you can double click on any of the windows within the window to make any one of them bigger. You can also toggle your chat window on and off to get a bigger view of whatever she's sharing. But I'll introduce Chloe now. So Chloé Messdaghi is that
Yeah.
Did I say that right?
You did.
Messdaghi is the VP of Strategy at Point3 Security. She's an InfoSec advocate and activist who strongly believes that information security is a humanitarian issue. Besides her passion to keep people safe and empowered online and offline, she's driven to fight for hacker rights as a co-founder of Hacking is Not a Crime. She's also the founder of WeAreHackerz, with a Z at the end, formerly known as WomenHackerz, also with a Z, and the president and co-founder of Women of Security, WoSEC. Podcaster for ITSP Magazine's The Uncommon Journey, and she runs the Hacker Book Club. So welcome, Chloe.
Thank you, Ryan, for the intro.
I'm going to jump off of video, but I'll be here on audio if anything comes up.
Excellent. All right.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to do this talk with you. We're going to dive a little bit in hacker rights. If you have not done this already, please go check out the poll section of this session and mark whether or not you are a hacker or you're just very paranoid, possibly. This will give me a good sense to know who is the audience that I'm talking to, so then I know exactly what things I need to make sure that I cover, just in case if people don't know some basic things. All right. So Ryan, when are the results going to be posted?
Takes it. You can see the results. So far we have 3 yeses, 1 no, and 5 people that are claiming not to be paranoid.
Okay, we'll go with that is the not to be paranoid one. All right, let's do this. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, everyone. All right. You should see this beautiful thing. All right, Ryan, you can see the full screen now? Excellent. So let's dive into this. So hi, everyone. If you do not know what session this is called Hacker Rights. And I just want to say that this talk is completely dedicated to all the hackers that have ever been scared to disclose, to all the hackers who have been prosecuted for trying to do something good or actually just doing their job, and to all the people who are in the fight to bring rights for hackers. And lastly, to you, because you're catching this talk, so there must be a reason why. For those that don't know who I am, my name is Chloé Messdaghi, and I am the VP of Strategy over at Point3 Security. I am a hacker advocate, and also I talk about info security all the time as well. But when I'm not doing that, I'm also the WoSEC co-founder and also president, and also founder of WeAreHackerz, formerly known as WomenHackerz, and podcaster for ITSP Magazine's The Uncommon Journey and the Hacker Book Club organizer, where we read a new book ran by the hacker community, and the hacker community reads it together every month. That is my URL. If you want to know anything about me, it is on there. And that's my Twitter and Instagram, so feel free to reach out anytime. My DMs are open. And if you just want to follow, go ahead and do so. All right. So we're going to dive into the current landscape. And I know this is a very scary subject, but we're going to go through it together. But before we go into that, I just want to explain the difference between a hacker and an attacker for those that aren't aware. There is a huge difference. They're 2 very separate groups of folks. So a hacker is someone who the intent is to help and protect people. For an attacker, their intent is to cause harm. That means through extortion. That means, yeah, pretty much extortion. So either demanding of money or trying to utilize you and your human behavior to get money from you or data from you. Hackers don't do that. Hackers, they only exploit when they have permission. They stay within scope as well. So that's something to think about. And if it's still a little bit hard to understand, think of a hacker as a locksmith and think of an attacker as a burglar. They're 2 different things. However, they use the same skill set to get to the same, to be able to utilize it to do what their goal is. Just the thing that's different is their goals are different. All right, so let's dive into the current landscape. I hope that covered everyone's questions, probably between a hacker and an attacker. So first but not least, I'm pretty sure you're all aware of what happened at Equifax, right? But did you know that a hacker reported to Equifax about this vulnerability that they found, and it was basically 5-6 months before the massive breach made headlines? And we see this very often when we want to disclose something. And when we do disclose, it's either ignored or it's misinterpreted, and suddenly it becomes a possible lawsuit threat towards you. Or Capital One, which is another case. So according to the federal complaint, the breach took place in stages across March and April of 2019, but Capital One itself only became aware of the problem on July 17th when the security researcher, or also known as hacker, right, tipped the company to a public GitHub page that was displaying something that looked an awfully lot like private Capital One data. The difference here, though, in this case, is that Capital One took action versus what we saw with Equifax did not take action. They ignored. Capital One took action based upon the disclosure that the hacker did. The thing is that one thing you'll learn through this talk is that disclosure is something that's really important for security, because with disclosure, it allows us to report things without having to worry too much about being prosecuted, as long as we don't extort without permission. And we stay within scope. But how are we to know what the scope is if you don't tell us? So there's all these different parts part of disclosure. And this talk is going to talk a lot about disclosure, because disclosure is the one thing that would allow us to have bilateral trust between organizations and the hacker community. So the one thing to understand is, but what if no one reported these vulnerabilities that ended up being breaches? The thing is that more and more breaches this year have increased by 400%. Think about that. And the thing about that is that a lot of those could have been avoided possibly if the organization itself had a disclosure program or had policies in place, so then a hacker can report their findings. This would make things a little bit safer and keep them more safe, kind of like what Equifax could have avoided if they actually listened to the hacker in the first place. But the thing to note about is that the hacker community in general don't always report the vulnerabilities because of the fear of being prosecuted. So Amit Elazari, you see in that corner, she did research about looking into safe harbor as a possibility for disclosure. And the one thing that she found was that 60% of researchers don't report vulnerabilities. However, another statistic came out recently, well, back in 2018, from HackerOne in a recent report in 2018. And in there, it stated that 1 out of 4 hackers would not report a vulnerability if the organization itself did not have a vulnerability program. Because they didn't have a vulnerability program, they were afraid of being prosecuted. However, the other thing to add on to it, those that did end up reporting the vulnerability to an organization that didn't have disclosure policies in place, they reached out via social media, or they tried to find the emails to contact the person. But when they would, they were often ignored or even misinterpreted in a way that they would end up with a lawsuit. So understandably, why are hackers scared? I mean, think about it. Besides being prosecuted for just trying to protect them and their consumers, the other thing is how to read the policies that are created sometimes can be a real burden. There are many people around the world that are hackers that English is not, they're an English learner. And so when these policies are written, it's usually written by attorneys so another attorney can understand it, when in reality, the hacker community, we're not all attorneys. So how are we supposed to know what's going to be okay or not? So that's one of the fears, right? Is like the communication aspect itself can be very scary and tricky. But also when reporting vulnerabilities, it's also a pain if you don't have disclosure policies in place because we don't know who to contact. So sometimes it'll take days and hours and weeks and whatnot to try to get someone to share this information to only be ignored. So as you can tell, there's a reason why hackers are scared, and only 1 out of 4 will actually report the vulnerability that they find. Now, if you're a company that's still like, well, I don't want to have disclosure and everything like that, because that brings more attention to me, I want you to understand something. Whenever someone goes to your website or has your product, what do you think they're doing? The chances are they're also playing around with it. Wouldn't you rather have a good channel where they can tell you about a vulnerability before an attacker takes advantage of it? So even if you're thinking, well, if I have vulnerability disclosure policy, it brings more attention to me, don't think that way, because it's actually not true. If anything, you just won't get people to report the vulnerabilities, and then you end up having more breaches in the end. So one of the cases I want to talk to you about is this case. So this is one of those cases that show how disclosure can go wrong, even if you have a program. So remember Amit El-Azhari, she said that 60% of security researchers don't report vulnerabilities. That's if they even have a vulnerability disclosure policies in place, because they don't even state what's in scope or not in scope or who to contact. So it leaves things on an iffy place. But also if you've heard in the past that certain organizations have been trying to threaten hackers when trying to disclose, then that's another thing to think about. So let's talk about DJI. So at this time, DJI, basically they decided to create their own bug bounty program. Now I want you to understand this. It was done in-house, not on a platform like HackerOne or Bugcrowd or Synack. It was within house. And they probably didn't research it very well. You'll see some flags throughout this story. But Kevin, who you see in this photo, he basically came across this bug bounty program with his friend Sean. And when they came over this bug bounty program, it covered all security issues in firmware, not just that, but application servers, including source code leak and security workaround and privacy issue. That Kevin, he wanted to really make sure before he participated in this program, before he started doing any type of research, that it would at least confirm in written somewhere in his documents stating that, yes, that is a confirmed scope. So he emailed them to make sure to confirm the scope, and it took them 2 weeks to respond. So I want you to understand that. Remember, they were trying to do this in-house of their own bug bounty program. The thing about it is that the fact that it took them 2 weeks to just go to the list that's already on the website to, once again, say, yes, that is the confirmed scope. But it took 2 weeks to do that. So it's already letting you know that they didn't have someone to be able to manage the program, most likely. But anyway, he did continue, and he ended up finding a vulnerability. And so he decided to report this vulnerability, and he was provided $30,000 for the finding. However, the agreement of receiving it offered no legal protection for himself. And at that point, he was like, well, I'm not going to sign this. I'm going to walk away from $30K. It's okay. The whole thing is, though, I don't want to even get into a situation of being prosecuted. Well, what happened was DJI freaked out and basically saw him as a potential PR situation. And they're like, we got to do something about this. So they decided to threaten him with a lawsuit connected to the CFA, the Computer Fraud Abuse Act, claiming that he went out of scope when he stayed within scope and even confirmed earlier on. Anyway, so what he ended up having to do is publish every communication with DJI online, including the lawsuit, for people to see what is happening. So they then withdrew going forward with the lawsuit when it came to Kevin because of the public embarrassment, but also became bad PR for them. Now, the thing to note is that if you go to his blog post, it's a really great read. I'm just going to throw it out there. But you can see there's an internal chain within the conversation itself, basically with the employee saying, oh, this could be a problem for us. This is a possible PR disaster for us. We need to do something. And that's when they decided they were going to, threaten him with a lawsuit. So it's one of those things to remember is that even if you're doing your job and even within scope, and even if you are disclosing with bilateral trust and whatnot, there's still this time and moment that an organization can still come after you, threaten you, and prosecute you. So it's something to keep in mind. So I just want people to understand that the hacker community, I know that first time you've probably never met anyone who's a hacker, or you may not know really too much about the hacker community. But this is the reason why the hacker community has a hard time doing the work that they love and keeping you safe, is because they're afraid. Another case is with Coalfire, and this is a physical security situation. So these two Coalfire employees, basically in September of 2019, basically conducted a penetration test to see if its staff could gain access to sensitive data or equipment from the Iowa State. So Iowa State hired them to do this. So the two coal fire employees basically found a door to the Dallas courthouse open, and when they closed the door to see if it would lock and then attempted to open it, the alarm went off. Going by protocol, they had their papers with them to get cleared so then they can, so they won't be in trouble or whatnot. Initially, they were told they were good to go, but then the local sheriff showed up and decided to arrest them, and they spent a night in jail. This case was dismissed at the beginning of January of this year. But just note that it's another example that even if you're hired to do this work, you still could be prosecuted. And that's the one thing we need to understand, is that still to this day, we're battling public perception of the hacker community. And because of the public perception doesn't know who we really are, that's causing problems for us. Because we still have legislation that's out of date. And also we have a hacker community that's very much afraid to do the work that they do. But they also, it's kind of a weird bind to be in, because you're also trying to do things to protect people. But then at the same time, sometimes that doesn't work well for you. But overall, community consensus to understand this whole situation is that vulnerability disclosure is something that we need. Government agencies would agree with this. Organizations agree with it. The hacker community agrees with it. Pretty much everyone's on board of it. It's just a matter of time to try to convince people to get involved with disclosure and how to build a good disclosure policy. So there are all these things to understand, but we're still dealing with organizations that still are afraid of the hacker community or even having a disclosure program. So the one thing to note is that program managers, they're asking to be hacked, but not hacked badly. But also they're still learning how to conduct and handle situations when hackers are reporting something to them. So it does keep everyone awake at night when they participate in this. But the thing is, we all know that we need it. Because let's be real, there's going to be times when your security team is not going to catch everything. And that's okay. That's just being human. We're human. We're going to make mistakes, but we'll probably miss something here and there. But the problem is that if we don't open the doors of like finding vulnerabilities, that becomes an issue, because diverse eyes can find things that we wouldn't be able to find. Diverse backgrounds, that is. So that's why bug bounty has grown substantially in the past few years, because it's the concept of getting the public to help disclose something, but also being mediated throughout the whole time. So it allows that bilateral trust to, to constantly be in a good state. So it's really important to understand that, is that diverse backgrounds can help find vulnerabilities that your security team cannot find or missed. And that's the really good thing to understand, is that the InfoSec community, if you don't know about our hacker community in a sense, we're always trying to help each other out. We kind of have each other's back. We're also trying to provide resources for each other. But that's the one thing, is the beauty of it is that we're always trying to share information in a sense to help other people and resources, but always in a good light, hopefully. And I know this is a tricky subject, and it's also a scary subject for all the hackers that are watching this. Virtual hugs. But the thing is like, take this moment, enjoy these puppies, because we're about to dive into some other stuff now. And yes, there's a kid, if you can see it. I know it's like a Where's Waldo, but way easier. All right, let's keep going. So why we have to ask ourselves, why is this situation still occurring? So the first things first I want you to understand is that the imagery still to this day, when you type in a criminal hacker versus an ethical hacker, you get the exact same results. And when I mean exact same results, of course, it's different websites and whatnot most of the time. But the thing that's different, or not different, I should say, is that you have the same imagery where it's dark, they're in a basement, they have their hoodie up, or they have a ski mask on. And the thing is to understand is that hackers are being seen as criminals. And that's why the public perception also still believes that hackers are criminals. So imagery does make a huge difference. And that's why it's important that we try to go about and trying to change that. because the chances of reporting a vulnerability is a lot more slim because of the imagery, because the hacker community knows that you're already seeing them in a dark lens, when in reality, they're just trying to be good. Yeah. And it's not just imagery, I want to just point out really fast. It's also the terminology being used. Still to this day, the media gets the two interchange, attacker and a hacker. And so this is a huge issue because it's not just images that we're now dealing with that basically feeds into these prejudiced views and opinions and beliefs, but it's also feeding stereotypes of what a hacker is. And the thing is that the most important thing to understand is that a lot of reporters, they just don't know there's a difference between a hacker and attacker. And it's something that we need to work on together, because what they should be using the term, if they're talking about an attacker, use the term criminals. And it's not just them that are, this is a huge issue, but also CISA has also been taking it on. FBI, they started changing the term. So now it shows up as cyber criminal or attacker or malicious actor versus using the term hacker. So if you're still wondering, okay, so how does this imagery and language impact us? The thing we need to talk about really, really fast is called socially constructed beliefs. You may not know about this term, but socially constructed beliefs are basically the beliefs that you have about the world that you live in. And this is based off of things that you've read about, images that you've seen, movies that you've seen, conversations you've had, teachers telling you something. But basically, socially constructed beliefs basically kind of allows you to understand how the world works and functions. And you've been doing that since you were a baby. But the one thing to note is that socially constructed beliefs also, they can feed into stereotypes and biases. And so the one thing we want to also do in our entire life is challenge our beliefs. When we challenge our beliefs, then we have a better idea of really what is the truth and what's not. But if we don't challenge that, then we run into some serious issues where we keep projecting beliefs onto another person or projecting beliefs of how the world works, when in reality, that's not how that works. And that becomes something very dangerous. So we're going to talk about how the brain works. And I know you probably were like, well, I didn't see cognitive science coming up, but we're doing some cognitive science. So we're going to talk about fear. So the first thing I want to talk about with fear is that, remember those socially constructed beliefs I was just talking about? Well, socially constructed beliefs basically live within your brain, and in particular in your temporal lobe, where your sensory input is deriving meanings and storing your memories. Now, the thing to note about it is that the temporal lobe also is where you have your emotions. So usually when we have, say, for example, a nightmare, okay, we're more likely to remember the details versus just a regular dream. And the reason for that is because a strong emotion was there and it was apparent in your dream. And this is caused by the amygdala, which is an almond-shaped tissue that lays within your temporal lobe. And basically, it is your response mechanism, but it's also known as your survival mechanism. And you may know of it as the fight versus flight mechanism, but you may not know that it's also the mechanism of sorting who's like me, who's not like me, and who to determine is stranger danger. Now, socially constructed beliefs, things that we've learned about the world we live in through, from media and from people around us, basically, they also help us determine who's like us, who's not like me. And based on that, we know who is stranger danger because of it. But once again, socially constructed beliefs could also be false. So we're going to talk through this really fast with an example. So say at some point in your life, you were told that people with pink hair are dangerous individuals. In reality, the only thing you need to know about is they just have pink hair. The only difference between you and this person with pink hair is just that they have pink hair. Of course, at this time, just imagine there was no hair dye out there, so they're stuck with pink hair. Now, when you turn on the news, what you see are criminals, people with pink hair. So you start imagining life that everyone with pink hair is most likely a criminal, because it's in movies, in books, it's things that you see on the news, but it's also things they've heard from family members indirectly. And so you're walking down the street, and while you're walking down the street, someone with pink hair is behind you. Now, you usually would do is you would cross the street to avoid, because there's a sense of stranger danger, because a socially constructed belief is within your mind saying that pink hair people are dangerous and you need to take action. So you can either cross the street to avoid, you could go inside, or you collect your bag a little bit more. So those are the three options that you have. But that initial response, that emotional response, is caused by the amygdala. The amygdala is saying, warning, warning, person with pink hair behind you, act. So then that message is then sent to the prefrontal cortex of your brain. But just note that that is a completely subconscious process. But when it gets to the prefrontal cortex, that message, then at that moment, you are now using logic. You're using the logic to reason and question that threat, but also coming up with game plans of how to react, whether or not to take that, clutch my bag a little bit closer, cross the street, go into a store. Those are all actions based on a threat. But there's also a moment where you decide whether or not you want to take on that threat. And so that's the thing to understand, is that the prefrontal cortex is a completely conscious decision now at this point. So using the socially constructed beliefs that you have, you start coming up with ideas of how to survive this moment. Now, the thing to understand about this is that you most likely would have done the following. You probably would have clutched your bag. You probably would have crossed the street. You would have gone into a store. That's usually how you would behave. The thing that's a little bit different, though, is say there's one way how you can change all of that. And that's simply hearing someone's story. I know that sounds like really like, wait, it's that simple? It really is, believe it or not. So research has shown that if you hear someone talking about a personal experience that they've experienced because of they look in certain ways, or there's something else, and people judge them for that, it challenges the way that you're thinking. But you have to first be okay with being wrong, which a lot of human beings, we don't like to be wrong, ever. Like, ever. When someone's like, no, you're wrong, a part of you wants to turn around. It's like, oh, no, I am right. You are wrong. But in reality, we might actually be wrong. The thing is, humans, we like to pretend that we know everything about the world. But in reality is that the more we learn about it, the more we feel like we don't know anything about the world. So the thing to keep in mind is, going back to the prefrontal cortex, it's a very important part of this process of fear, because it's verifying a belief and a threat. And you get to have that one moment to decide, what's it going to be? So say, for example, you watched a YouTube video and this person with pink hair is talking openly of how hard it is to have pink hair because everyone always sees them as a criminal. And it touches you because a part of you is like, I wonder if I've done anything that could have hurt this person. Oh my God, I definitely feel like I've clutched my bag at some point because they had pink hair and I didn't even know. It was just a reflex. So the good news about this whole thing is that once it goes through the prefrontal cortex, you make your decision whether or not you want to go forward processing and continuing with stereotyping or having prejudiced beliefs and whatnot, or you can take a moment to be different. And that is sending a signal back to the amygdala to calm down. So I hope that whole thing you now know how fear works, how socially constructed beliefs work, but also you can understand now how the situation can be. Because if you tell someone, oh, I'm a hacker, there's a couple things they do. Their eyes get really, really big. They look terrified, but they're trying to keep their calm, or their mouth literally just drops, like their jaw just drops. And let me tell you, I have seen this and it's pretty hilarious. Or they'll try to find a way how to get out of the conversation. So the thing is that people are still afraid of hackers because of what they see in the media, because of those images and those words that are being used. It's scary for them. And it's hard for them to hear our story because they haven't heard our story yet. So just remember this, is that we always have the ability to question our biases, and we have to be uncomfortable with it because it's okay to be wrong. That's called growing up. That's called being a human. That calls being a good citizen in this world, is taking that moment to see, how am I hurting the world? How am I making it better? And do something about that, because life is short. Why not live in a way that you're doing where people can thrive right around you? But most importantly, you have to get outside of your comfort bubble. And that's the thing we need to talk about. Because these socially constructed beliefs, what they have done is caused 94% of the Forbes Global 2000 to not have any vulnerability disclosure policies. And still, we are dealing with the 60% of hackers don't report vulnerabilities. And laws that prevent good hacking is also an issue, like the Computer Fraud Abuse Act, which we'll dive into, in the DMCA. But also, prosecuting ethical hackers has been an ongoing situation. And then also, it can increase to number of bad actors, because think about it. If you can get paid more, or, if you could get paid more, or you could get paid the same, but you're constantly worried of being prosecuted regardless if you were in scope or not, or if you're on the good side or not, what difference does it make? And that's the thing we have to talk about seriously. Because if we change the way legislation is right now and we start changing public perception of the hacker community, I have a feeling that we might actually have a reduction of malicious actors, because suddenly they realize there's a legal way how to do this, a way that I'm protected. And that is worth everything, because there are bad actors that end up becoming good hackers. And the thing that was the incentive was that the insomnia of getting caught. So think about that. But overall, let's dive into a quick worldwide legislation thing. So all around the world, we have anti-hacking laws, anti-circumvention laws, and acceptable use policy. Now, the thing to note about this is that anti-hacking laws is basically laws that prohibit accessing a computer without authorization or excess of authorization, but it's also used when a researcher goes out of scope. This is the act used to prosecute hacking in general, and that's all around the world. Also, anti-circumvention laws, such as the DMCA, which we have in the US. And what these anti-circumvention laws is basically seeing a breach to property when reverse engineering. An acceptable use policy, as you're probably aware, is anytime that you're looking at, you have an update or you get a new device or whatnot, you have to read 50 pages of language that you don't want to read at all. And you probably have already signed your life at some point, especially with Apple products. But the whole thing is to understand is that we don't like to read something that's so verbiage. Like if we wanted to do that, we would have been attorneys or professors or whatnot, but that's not what we're here for. And so that's the one thing is to understand is that when you are an English learner, it's hard for you to understand acceptable use policy. And the same as if you are an English speaker, it's really hard to understand it because you're not an attorney, and it's so much verbiage. Like we could do a way better job on this. But a quick fact before we go to the next slide is that, did you know that Ronald Reagan, he watched the movie War Games, and when he watched it, he was inspired to create the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which is founded in 1984, because he freaked out about hackers being in that movie and was like, we got to do something about these hackers. I can't do his voice. I can't do it. But anyway, the thing is to understand is that when you look at this list, you have a 1984 and a 1998. These are both acts, and we're in 2020. It seems a little bit out of date, right? And there's been no reform in it. So the main takeaway from that slide is that we have laws right now that prevent good hacking in the same way they prevent attackers, and we need good hacking. But I want to dive into the CFA because I hate it. And I'm pretty sure you will too if you don't know about this. So the Computer Fraud Abuse Act, once again passed in 1984, is wildly outdated and offers prosecutors discretion to threaten huge potential fines and jail sentences for relatively undeserving violations of the computer policy. First, the CFA as written punishes exceeding authorized access to a protected computer, a phrase very, very vague enough to inspire some really broad interpretations. But not just that, but another flaw in CFA is the redundant provisions. Now, the redundant provisions enable a person to be punished multiple times for the exact same crime. And these charges can be stacked on top of another, resulting in a threat of a higher cumulative fines and jail time for the exact same violation, which we saw in the Aaron Schwartz case, which we'll get into next. But this allows prosecutors to bully defendants into accepting a deal in order to avoid facing a multitude of charges from a single solitary act. It also plays a significant role in sentencing. The ambiguity of the provision meant to toughen sentencing for like a repeat offender, so the CFA may in fact make it possible for defendants to be sentenced based on what should be prior convictions, but were nothing more than multiple convictions for the same crime. Now, I want to just point this out really fast, is that since 2017, the Justice Department has been doing whatever they can to protect ethical hackers when on this kind of front. But the one thing you should know is that the CFA allows companies to have the right to sue. And because of that, that's the one threat, the main threat that hackers have to worry about are companies and sometimes states or local government, but not so much of the Justice Department anymore. But it's really important that we touch on Aaron Schwartz's case, because Aaron Schwartz's case is an example of how CFA failed someone and it cost them their life. So the one thing to note about this story is that it's heartbreaking, because in 2011, Carmen Ortez, the attorney's office, charged Schwartz with basically hacking into the MIT computer network to download millions of scholarly articles on JSTOR. It was supposed to be an act of civil disobedience meant to protest the restricted access to research because it's tax-paid. It's funded by taxpayers, to be honest. So, but the thing was that the U.S. attorney brought charges that carried a maximum penalty of 35 years in prison. Now, I want to pause there, but did you know in the U.S., a first-degree murder, the minimum is 25 years? He was looking at 35 years in prison. Not just that, but also $1 million in fines. And the reason that they were able to do that is because the way the CFA is written, because you can stack upon stack on every little thing over one case and also increase the fines. Now, the thing about Aaron's situation that is the heartbreaking part is that this was a legal battle that was going on for 17 months, and there was no end in sight. Like, nothing looked like this was going to happen or get cleared anytime soon, or what was going to end up happening for him. And if you can imagine, it must have been so difficult for him, and the stress, the anxiety with it, it must have been so overwhelming. But on July 11, 2013, Aaron Schwartz, he hung himself in his apartment. Now, of course, the federal prosecutors, they went on to drop the charges, but his family still believes to this day that it was because of them that he took his own life. Because of what Aaron went through, a few people in the community decided to come together with some politicians to try to create something that would protect people so they wouldn't have a situation like Aaron happen to them. And it was called Aaron's Law. But the thing to note is that it didn't pass. And the reason for that was that some major tech companies with some big pockets lobbied heavily to make sure that this wouldn't pass forward. But what the Aaron's Law was important to understand was that it was going to remove the phrase exceeds authorized access and replace it with access without authorization, which defined as to obtain information on a computer that the accessor lacks authorization to obtain by knowingly circumventing technological or physical measures designed to prevent unauthorized individuals from obtaining that information. Now, the DMCA, which is a copyright basically our copyright act in the US. But the thing, I can talk about this one too as well, but I just want the main takeaway from this moment to understand that hackers have not been charged under DMCA, but it does provide a chilling effect. So this is the one thing to understand, is that we still have to keep an eye on the DMCA and what it could do to the hacker community. But just to note that the one thing about the DMCA is that it's basically there to prevent cases of making copies of purchased products or jailbreaking or using the device in ways the manufacturer didn't want or disliked. But basically, that's the one thing is to remember about that, is that that is an issue that we always have to worry about. But with improvements to legislation, we can have all the Forbes Global 2000 have vulnerability disclosure policy. We can have 100% of hackers to report vulnerabilities. Laws that encourage good hacking, no more prosecuting ethical hackers, and decrease number of malicious hackers. Because the reason that there would be improvements of legislation was because there was representation at the forefront when there is a reform. And that is the one problem that we still struggle in politics to this day, is that the parties that were going to be or are going to be impacted by any legal legislation out there are not getting their voice heard. And this is what happens. People get hurt. and unintended consequences occurs. Because if there was representation, the CFA, the way that it would be written is that it would prevent bad hacking, but encourage good hacking. And that's the thing that's different. So what we need to do at this point is work on that, is to make sure we are represented when there is a reform talk or when we're talking about adding amendments. And that's the thing. As long as we have representation, we have a voice, and that's important. So we're going to talk about how to get that voice. So we first have to influence the public cycle. So organizations, they got to have disclosure policies for us because they help us build our bilateral trust. But also the media to work with us. And by media, what that means is marketing and press and social media. That's under media, by the way, and legislation. So in order to have rights for hackers, we need the public on board, just in general. In order to do so, we need to dive into those categories, which we kind of already have, but we need the media to push for the public to become aware. In other words, we need them to change the language and imagery of a hacker and start using the proper terms, which is cyber criminal, malicious actor, and attackers for those that commit unethical hacking. Overall, really separate the two groups. In order to help the media, organizations need to be on board with bilateral trust with having vulnerability disclosure policies. By showing they support hackers, the public does change their view in general. And because organizations and the media are very much connected to legislation, they can push and motivate Capitol Hill to get on board and update the current legislation that will protect ethical hackers. Overall, we need all three to support hacker rights to become a reality, because at this time, the public still doesn't know too much about cybersecurity, or even our legislators. Not too many of them actually know about cybersecurity. And until they have a better idea of how security works in the hacker community, we're not going to get any of this. So how do we get there? You're probably wondering. Well, first things first, here are the 5 needs to bring awareness for ethical hackers. Basically, we need to work with the media. We need to work with organizations. We need to push out our story, our personal stories, to challenge people's socially constructive beliefs of who we are and what we do. And we're hoping that ends up also having meetings with representatives today. So there's one step that you can do. There is a link right there. It is a petition that I created at the end of February. But basically, we've had thousands of signatures on this already, but it basically is pushing to the front that we need the media to be on top of this. We also need organizations to know about this and know about that we're dealing with these issues, and we need them to help us out at this point. So this petition brings public awareness. Now, when I created this petition and everything, I didn't know what was going to end up happening next, which is I basically co-founded a group called Hacking is Not a Crime, which is a grassrooted effort of the hacker community to try to change where we stand today. And that means working with other organizations to push for hacker rights, but also to bring awareness to us and also change public perception of what we do and who we are. And that's what Hacking is Not a Crime is all about, is we're working with media and organizations and legislators to try to change the situation that we're currently in. The second step that you can do is tell the press. So anytime a press gets it wrong, like they use the term hacker and said they should be using attacker, call them out on it, but be kind and polite, because remember, they may not know that that's not the correct terminology. And because that's something to keep in mind. Now, you can also do is send a letter to the copy desk as well to make sure that all future articles that are written about the hacker community are using the correct terminology. That's another way how to do it. But if you're someone who offers comments to the press, it's really important that you don't wear a hoodie. And you're probably like, wait, what? Yeah, we want to get away from the hoodie thing. You can wear the hoodie right when you're off camera and whatnot, but when you're on camera, don't wear a hoodie. We need to challenge people's stereotypes of what we look like. And also, if you are giving comments to the press, also make sure that you let the reporter know that there is a difference between a hacker and attacker, so they're aware of it. I've had many times where I've talked to someone in the press and I explained to them the differences, and then they started writing it in a better way, because that's what it is to be a journalist, is that you want to accurately report things. So just remember, tell the press, but be kind, have empathy. Don't be attacking them, because they might not just know what's better. The third step is if you're an organization yourself, you could come and partner and campaign with us for hacker rights. We're right now starting up with some organizations. You probably know of Red Team Village, but we also on the side work, we've been helping Coalfire on protecting ethical hackers as well. But you can also, if you work at a company and they don't have a vulnerability disclosure policies, it might be a good time for you to start pushing forward on that. And if you do, I recommend checking out disclose.io. It's a great resource to know what companies have vulnerability disclosure policies. And if you see any organization that's missing on the list, go ahead and add to it. It's a community run list. But also there's policies on there for you to be able to brainstorm and use for your company if you want to have disclosure policies or revamp them in a way that's better. Fourth step is contact your local representatives to update current legislation. But don't do it alone. So if you do get a meeting with them, contact Hack Not Crime on Twitter or contact me, DM me, and we will be there for you in that meeting. It's important that we don't go by ourselves. We have to work together. This is an effort that we go hand in hand with. We are going to help each other out because that's what we do in this community. But also to know about the VanBuren versus US case is coming up, and that's something you need to keep an eye on. And we'll go into that next. But one quick thing. Remember, the goal when you meet with your representative isn't to tell them how to do their job. It is to be there to support them too. So in other words, find out what they're passionate about. What are the things that they want to fix desperately? And try to figure out a way how you have common ground for hacker rights and the thing that they're trying to work on. That's how you have a conversation with a representative, is to be there and to support them and for them to understand your cause and see where it overlaps. So the VanBuren US case, I just want to quickly cover that because that's something really, really important that you need to know about. So a former Georgia officer is wrongly convicted under the notoriously known Computer Fraud Abuse Act. Basically, he has asked the Supreme Court to reject the dangerously overbroad interpretation of the law for his case. Thing to note is that this is going to be looked at on November 30th in the Supreme Court. At this time, we don't know if the date's going to change because of the election, but that's the one thing you can find. So the VanBuren versus US case is Nathan VanBuren. He basically was accused of taking money in exchange for looking up license plate information in the law enforcement database. He was convicted of violating CFA because he allegedly used that database for improper purpose, even though it was a database that he was allowed to access for work purposes. So under this expansive interpretation of CFA, it would become a federal crime at any time a person violates a website's term of services. Now, this is the most important part now, so listen very close. Because if violating terms of service is a crime, private companies then get to decide who goes to prison and for what, putting us all at risk for everyday online behavior. So this is a case we need to be on top of. The fifth step that you can do is to support I Am the Cavalry, Disclose.io, CertCC, EFF, CTI, League. These are wonderful organizations that could totally use your time and energy to help them out on their causes. Because in reality, we have to work together as organizations because that's how we get stronger, is coming together. So I recommend volunteering too. And I hope the main takeaways for this entire thing is to know that hackers deserve rights. We need protection. And the current imagery and language has been misleading the public in so many ways. And we need to work together to change the public's perception. There's a petition you can sign, or you could just go to hackingisnotacrime.org, where you can find out everything that you can do to get involved. And also, remember, we have to keep pushing for a change. Change doesn't happen if we stop pushing. Let's be real. And also, feel free to share this talk. But most importantly, from this entire thing, I hope you remember this, is that change starts with you and me. And we cannot give up this fight. We must continue to fight for rights because we all know someone at some point who had to face some really serious threats because they disclosed something or because they did something and because of the legislation that's out there. And it's very painful to see our friends and colleagues having to deal with situations of people misinterpreting their words or trying when they're trying to do something good, or ignoring them because they see them as a threat. And that's the thing we need to change. We have a problem. And the problem is, I don't think humans were listening to each other anymore. And maybe we've never have been really good at listening to each other. But I hope this year brings more attention to you that more than ever, we need to start listening. We need to listen to people's stories. And by listening, I mean listening, not like, how do I respond to this? Oh, okay, I can respond to that comment. No, just listen. Because that's what people need at the end of the day, is for you to hear them out. Because when we listen, we have a better understanding how the world actually works. And we have to be okay with being uncomfortable and getting outside our bubble. So anyway, thank you guys so much for existing. Stay safe, wear a mask. If you have any questions, I am here for you. But I also wanted to just say a quick thank you to SaltStack. Thank you guys so much. If you guys do not know, but they were our main sponsor for WoSEC this year. And if it wasn't for them, we would probably not be having WoSEC this year. So we're extremely thankful to SaltStack, and thank you guys so much for having me. You can feel free to follow me or DM me at any time. That is my handle. And you can do that either on Twitter or Instagram, whatever works best for you. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll take any questions that you guys may have.
Awesome, Chloe. I also added a poll for whether people want to get involved or not.
Excellent.
And let me just see if we've gotten any responses. Yes, we've gotten one response for yes. So jump on over there. The rest of you that are on here need to take that poll and get involved. How Chloe recommended several other ways to do it. This poll is just a thermometer, right? We're not actually going to chase you down.
No, I have no idea who's saying yes or no. We're just assuming you're on good behavior and not trolling.
Right.
So Joey asked, do you have any European cases like Aaron? To be honest, I don't really know too much about Europe on that sense, but the reason that this talk was very US-centric is because when the US created CFA, other countries started following, including Europe. So I do not know too much about the cases that you could find in Europe, like similar to Aaron, but I can certainly look into it. When it comes to on a separate one that's close by is also Canada. So Canada, they have good number of cases, but no one has ever been prosecuted and thrown into jail. So there's a difference on that front. Here we throw people into jail.
Bad record of doing that here.
Yeah, we do it right away.
Yeah. So Chloe, I have a question for you. It seems like a little while back, people were trying to distinguish hacker from the word cracker. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, yeah.
And was that just a passing phase and it didn't stick?
I think the thing is that sometimes in security, or in InfoSec, the more deep we get, the more deep we get. But the thing is that cracker and outside of InfoSec means something very, very different. And it's actually really inappropriate. So that's why I don't think it ever caught on.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Any other questions? Roger says in US only. Thank you very much. Good talk. Any other questions before we drop? We have about 30 seconds left before I think we get kicked off. So thank you everyone for joining. And thank you, Chloe, so much for joining us at SaltConf. We really appreciate you being here and love to support WoSEC. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to hit the leave button. If you want to do the same, then we are done. And thank you everyone for joining.
Bye everyone. Stay safe, vote, wear a mask. All right, bye.
Bye.